When Lexy Hull and Stephanie White approached the platform, their looks told the full tale before they ever opened their mouths, stopping the basketball world in its tracks. The WNBA would be rocked by what they were going to tell about Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham, demonstrating how deeply this league has let its biggest talents down. This was not your typical injury update. This was a scathing critique of a system that has been flawed for far too long. Nobody anticipated the news conference. Nobody anticipated the day that would completely alter the WNBA. An urgent press conference had been arranged by the Indiana Fever. Additionally, you could tell this wasn't going to be a standard team release about practice schedules or community engagement initiatives when you saw Lexy Hull and head coach Stephanie White's names attached. Hull appeared as though he had not slept for days when he entered the room. As one of the most dependable players in the league, someone who controls her emotions and conducts business without drama, she most likely hadn't. Everyone shuddered when they saw how shaken she was. Stephanie White was standing next to her. Additionally, if you have been following the squad for a while, you are aware that White doesn't call urgent press conferences for trivial matters. Throughout her coaching career, this woman has witnessed everything, and the look on her face told it all. Reporters who had given up everything to be there crowded the room. Phones were filming, cameras were clicking, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Hull's voice was calm when she eventually took the stage, but you could hear the weight in every word. She wasn't merely expressing her opinions as a teammate. She was speaking as someone who has witnessed the demise of two of her closest friends due to a system that makes no effort to demonstrate its concern for player welfare. The unpleasant reality that everyone in the WNBA had been attempting to conceal would be revealed by what she said during those initial moments. There was more to this than just injuries. This was about a league that has no idea how to safeguard the players who are bringing them out of obscurity and into the public eye on their own. The heartbreaking truth behind Caitlin Clark's publicity. You could hear a pin drop in that room when Hull began discussing Caitlin Clark. She wasn't referring about the record-breaking rookie, though, who had packed venues all across the nation. She wasn't referring to the player whose highlights were featured on SportsCenter every night or whose jersey sales had skyrocketed. Hull was referring to her buddy, teammate, and someone whose debut season had been a complete nightmare for whom no one was ready. Clark had to miss All-Star Weekend due to a groin ailment, but that was only the beginning. Hull disclosed that Clark had been playing through agony for weeks, concealing the full severity of her injuries because she believed that the league as a whole depended on her performance. And you know what? She was correct. The WNBA had placed all of its bets on Caitlin Clark. Additionally, they continued to push her harder when she began to struggle rather than defend their golden goose. Hull talked about seeing Clark go from being a self-assured, happy player who enjoyed playing on the court to someone who was obviously drowning under pressure that would crush most people. Every team was preparing their strategies with the express purpose of stopping her. The use of double teams became commonplace. Hard fouls started to happen frequently. The rookie, who had crushed college basketball, was up against one-goal defenses created by professional coaches. Make Caitlin Clark's life unpleasant for 40 minutes each night. This is where things get really fouled up, though. Because she was aware of the impact her presence had on ticket sales, TV ratings, and the expansion of women's basketball, Clark had been concealing how terrible things actually were. This 22-year-old child felt accountable for managing a whole sport. And because she didn't want to disappoint anyone, she kept her physical and mental breakdowns to herself. At this point, White jumped in and made a revelation that ought to keep every WNBA executive up at night. To get through games, Clark had been taking painkillers. She was secretly attending additional therapy sessions. She knew that her absence would result in empty arenas and declining TV ratings, so she was overcoming discomfort that would have kept most players out of the game. The news that Clark's playing time will be drastically cut was shocking. When required, she would skip games. When she did suit up, she would only play a few minutes, and her media obligations would be drastically reduced. Although it was the best course of action for her long-term health, it revealed how reliant this league had grown on a single player. The nightmare that ended Sophie Cunningham's season. If the news about Clark was distressing, what Hull and White disclosed about Sophie Cunningham was even more tragic. The seasoned guard, who was regarded as one of the league's toughest players and who never backed down from anyone, sustained a torn MCL in her right knee, which would put an abrupt end to her season. You could hear the rage rising in Hull's voice as she went through the play step by step. Berea Hartley of Connecticut drove to the hoop, lost her balance, and crashed straight into Cunningham's right thigh while Cunningham was defending close to the rim. Cunningham grasped her knee in obvious pain as the violent contact instantly knocked her to the ground. The circumstances and timing of this injury made it much more tragic. Earlier in the season, Cunningham had already struggled with an ankle issue. She was having the best season of her career after battling her way back into the starting lineup. Her three-point shooting was unbelievable. Younger athletes like Clark benefited much from her leadership. And as one of the most underappreciated athletes in the league, she had finally begun to receive the credit she deserved. However, this is what really irritates me about the entire circumstance. According to the medical diagnosis, the MCL was completely torn, necessitating months of therapy. Being made to watch from the sidelines was devastating for a player whose entire reputation was built on her toughness and refusal to back down from rough play. Additionally, White said that Cunningham's initial response was unconcerned with her own recuperation. It was a question about whether she could continue to play and support her team. For Cunningham, both personally and professionally, the injury occurred at the worst possible moment. She was finally earning attention as one of the league's most complete players. Her shooting had improved dramatically, and she had become a fan favorite because of her intensity and loyalty to her teammates. Now, all of that was lost due to a single play that might have been avoided if the league genuinely cared about player safety, the link that held everything together. When Hull began discussing her relationship with Clark and Cunningham, it was one of the most impactful parts of the entire press conference. Fans' moniker for Trace Leches was more than just a charming tale of team harmony. For all three players to survive in this competition, it had become a vital support system. Hull explained how Cunningham had taken Clark under her wing from the beginning and developed into the seasoned figure who guided him through the difficult transition from collegiate standout to professional athlete under unheard-of pressure. Cunningham stayed after practice to work on fitness as Clark struggled with the physical demands of the WNBA. Cunningham was the one who deflected challenging inquiries and made herself available to reporters when the pressure from the media became too severe, allowing Clark to concentrate on his recuperation. However, the relationship was reciprocal, and this is where these guys' personalities truly come through. Hull disclosed that Cunningham's ankle ailment earlier in the season had been greatly aided by Clark. They worked together for hours in the training room, encouraging one another at difficult times and pushing one another through recovery exercises. Hull played a crucial part in keeping everyone grounded throughout all of this. While Cunningham struggled through several injuries and Clark faced with stardom she never asked for, Hull offered the stability and dependability that kept the team together. The league has come to revere her quiet leadership and clutch shooting. More significantly, though, she had developed into her teammates' emotional support system. These three athletes had created a support system of their own. Group SMS messaging at all times, subtle cues during games, and a pledge to support one another no matter what occurs on or off the court. Hull's basketball prowess wasn't the only factor in her selection to take Clark's position at All-Star Weekend events. It was an acknowledgement of her personality and the importance she played in keeping this squad cohesive during a time when everything else was crumbling. The league's total failure was revealed. Hull and White talked on more than just specific injuries. They called out the WNBA for structural flaws that had been developing for years during this press conference. And honestly, it was about time someone with credibility said what everyone else had been thinking. For a professional colleague, the travel circumstance alone is awkward. Due to crowded seats and lengthy layovers, WNBA players frequently arrive at games exhausted and hurting from their commercial flights. Hull recounted matches in which players were still rigid from planes that had touched down only hours before tip-off. Professional players are confined to middle seats on Southwest Airlines, while collegiate teams go on charter. White discussed the gap between the league's real dedication to player welfare and their marketing goals. For years, the WNBA had been frantically trying to gain widespread recognition. Additionally, they worked hard to capitalize on Clark's breakthrough moment without taking the player's own well-being into account. It's as though they discovered a golden goose and began shaking it violently right away. For months, the coaching staff had been requesting changes to the schedule, better travel plans, and more time to recuperate between games. While the league put TV contracts and marketing opportunities ahead of player health, those demands were disregarded. Executives in any other professional sport would be sacked for such outdated thinking. Hull made a point that ought to make every WNBA decision-maker feel ashamed. These lessons were taught to other professional colleagues decades ago. They make investments in long recuperation times, charter aircraft, and extensive medical support networks. Instead of being a professional company, the WNBA continues to function as a startup league, demanding elite performance without offering elite support. The press conference served as a model for quick adjustments, better travel, longer breaks between games, better medical facilities, and, above all, the realization that player health must take precedence above commercial prospects. The message was very obvious. Taking care of athletes rather than merely taking advantage of them when they perform is essential to the league's future. The WNBA should be terrified by this financial reality check. This is where Hull and White landed the punch that should have caused every WNBA executive to update their CV. They discussed more than simply player welfare and injuries. They outlined the financial ruin that results from failing to safeguard your biggest stars. The figures are severe, and they don't lie. WNBA viewership fell by 55% while Clark was sidelined due to her prior quad injury. The whole league, not only Fever games. When Clark performed, the number of watchers on TV fell from 1.8 million to just 847,000. It's not a dip. Anyone who knows how television contracts operate should be terrified of that freefall. The cost of tickets reveals an even more depressing tale. Previously priced at $860, Fever games are now only $250. The average cost of a ticket dropped from $137 to $80. Road games that had been relocated to bigger venues in order to meet the demand for Clark tickets were suddenly finding it difficult to fill spaces that would have been crowded with her presence. This, however, reveals the league's total reliance on Clark. Tickets for one of the season's most anticipated games, the Chicago Sky vs. Fever rematch, fell from $210 to $95. This clash was previously one of the most watched WNBA games in history, drawing 2.25 million viewers. Without Clark, it was just another game that casual viewers didn't want to watch. Corporate sponsors who made millions of dollars worth of investments predicated on Clark's success are now doubting the wisdom of their choices. Despite the Clark spike, the league was already predicted to lose $50 million this year. Those losses are increasing at a frightening rate without her on the court as everything reverts to pre-Clark levels. This financial reality should serve as a wake-up signal for future CBA discussions, according to Hull and White. When it comes time to talk about player compensation and perks, the league will bring up these figures and question how they can defend higher expenditures when their whole business model is based on the health of one player.